Last week it was the United States, and now it's China. The mainland central bank says its moves to boost the economy is working. Governor Zhou Xiaochuan says the slowdown has been arrested and that first signs of recovery are there. Mr. Zhou says China will be a stabilizing force for the world economy. Earlier in the week, he made waves worldwide when he expressed concern about the U.S. dollar. Mr. Zhou made these remarks ahead of the G20 summit in London next week. How is he positioning China for this important meeting? Patrick McNutt, a professor at Manchester Business School, says Beijing is, rightly, flexing its financial muscle.
It happened in 1912 when we moved from the sterling to the dollar as the main reserve currency. Then there was a change in economic influence. It's not so much that the Chinese want this, it's actually happening. The rest of the world is decoupling from developed worlds. We made the point before that many Asian economies are exporting within their own regions. Only 25% of Asian exports go to the developed world. So they need to see some degree of consistency in exchange rates. So the world is changing.
And the world is indeed changing.
China,
if we're going to see a worse economic situation from where we are right now, will that be allowed? And if ever that happens, when are we likely to see this new global currency taking into effect?
If it can be agreed in principle next week at the G20 summit in London, and a very strong signal goes to the international community that exchange rates are on the agenda, we're looking at possibly a year or so before it can be implemented, and then a 2-year period for it to be put in practice.
But don't you think at the back of the minds of the Chinese, the Americans will not allow it, the Western economies will not allow it, but they just really want to position themselves ahead of this G20 leadership summit that, yes, we are doing our part to fix the global economy. We are aggressive in terms of monetary and fiscal stimulus. That's why you also have to listen to us.
Yes.
It's not only the Western economies that should be listened to.
Yes. What you're hearing now are signals between China, the US, and the EU. These signals are all part of a signaling game. Governments are currently in a signaling game. So the signals are very important. But at the end of the day, Europe, where I'm based, would not be happy with a strong euro that sees exports being constrained simply by the exchange rate. And economies in Europe cannot change their exchange rates individually because we're now part of a euro.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's why the U.S., through Timothy Geithner and President Obama, have come up with a more aggressive stance in terms of trying to fix the financial system in the U.S. and come out with more aggressive regulatory frameworks to be able to solve the financial system is because of what the Chinese have said over the past week?
Well, I guess it's cause and effect. You could argue, yes, in a sense, that the fiscal stimulus is necessary to try and solve this crisis. And the Americans, and to a certain extent the Europeans, and indeed China is investing in infrastructure. Mm. They're continuing with the expansion of the Beijing underground, for example. Mm. But all of that is necessary. But we also need to see some way to manage the exchange rate. We're not talking about a fixed exchange rate. We're talking about a band where the exchange rates can fluctuate within an agreed band. And that allows escape clauses for the economies. So governments can still use fiscal policy if they so wish, and they can still use monetary policy if they so wish.
Patrick McNutt from the Manchester Business School.